Pegasus Imagery. Where did give us a little bit of history. Where did you guys come from? So retired military yourself.
Yep.
And kind of just take us through the process of where you got to get the company started and the idea and how you came to be today.
Sure. So I spent 15 years in the infantry, stationed here in Edmonton, Alberta, for all 15 of those years. So my background is actually in the parachute infantry. So I spent a lot of time jumping out of planes and being cold and tired, and couldn't really talk to my friends a whole lot of the time. So entrepreneurship seemed like a natural fit to kind of follow on. Spent most of the time in an operational unit, almost the entire time in an operational unit, up until an injury, and from that. Working and training and deploying with our allies overseas, drone technology was everywhere, or it was ramping up. So if you had access to it, it was a massive game changer. Everything just became easier. It became more effective, had better information, everybody was safer, did a much higher quality job. And then conversely, a bit of a dichotomy, the military gets called out for a lot of like civilian help, aid to civil power. So 2013 floods in southern Alberta. There's a Fort McMurray fire, obviously, but every year, fires and floods in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan. We have the East Coast right now being hammered by massive snowfall, and the military is actually in the streets right now helping people dig out of their homes. Yeah. That's the military's job, is to protect Canadians here at home. And when I was in the military and we got called out for these domestic response and domestic assistance operations, these tools that we relied on overseas, they're not here. So we look around and you see a huge private sector apparatus to help attack wildfires or emergency management. The tools that they need to have an intelligence-driven approach to solving problems isn't there. So at this point, everybody's basically kind of stuck playing defense. So I took a pretty serious injury in the military, and otherwise I would have stayed in. I loved it. And then for me, it was to try and figure out what my next mission was going to be. I looked back and thought, like, what's the most important thing? Service is kind of how I grew up. So decided to start a company to basically not try and solve everybody's problems, but if we can deliver the intelligence that people need, they can then go out and make better decisions themselves, and we can have a much wider effect. We can have a step order effect for a bunch of different reasons. Yeah,
and it really looks like through this service we can be a lot more. You talk about being always on defense, but we can be a lot more proactive as opposed to reactive with this kind of service out there in a civilian scenario or in a commercial aspect. So you guys grew super fast. Things kind of, you were mentioning off camera, like it just was like, we were just said, hey, how's it going? And we were getting phone calls and we hadn't even gotten a website kind of up yet. Yeah. So kind of tell us just about that journey from, I'm going to do this to tomorrow, oh crap, I'm doing it. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Timing. Yeah. It really just comes down to timing. So the company's actually incorporated in 2015. But the regulator here in Canada and in the US and around the world, regulators, they weren't ready to regulate. So the market readiness wasn't there. There's a drone.com kind of boom and bust for about 18 months. Everybody wanted to be a drone company, and then without the regulator being ready to move and actually start changing, they all basically bled out. Yes. They bled out of cash. So we went to go launch the company in spring of 2018. So I left the military in June. I was at a pitch competition in Calgary the next week. Super awkward coming from the military where everything is like being a quiet professional. Right. And then having to stand there in front of a room of people and be like, okay, so everyone look at me. I'm going to basically tell you my story. And here's my little baby, which isn't the company idea. And it obviously didn't come across as that, right? I didn't say like my friend Karen has a problem. I was like, this is what we're doing is really important. Bing, bing, bing. Here's the pitch deck. Yeah. And then I didn't win the pitch competition, obviously, but one of the judges was a partner at a program called Draper University. They're Silicon Valley's premier pre-accelerator program. So it's like one of the churches in the valley. So I got offered a scholarship. I didn't know what Draper University was. I'd never heard of this Tim Draper guy. Whoever he is, and then went down to the program, and it was a 5-week-long program, and I didn't really know what I was getting into, so I booked a one-way plane ticket, and then turned out it was the perfect opportunity for me to get over a couple things. One, really understand that who I am and like what we're doing as a company, as a startup, and the potential for it, and then get over like imposter syndrome was a big thing. Like, you know, like we talked, like the program is filled with people from around the world.
Right.
And I'm, you know, from Edmonton, Alberta. But out of that program, I did a huge amount of personal growth, and that was the number one thing that really came out of it. Was it gave me kind of like that nuclear Tony Stark engine about like, I see it. I see clearly now. My aperture is much more wide, is much wider. I can see the landscape for what technology really means, as opposed to, you know, how we kind of see like the next iPhone coming out.
Right.
We think that that's technology, and there's the future's already here. It's just not widely distributed yet.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and as a startup, I mean that, and seeing other people kind of at your level. Like I know you're going in and you're talking about the imposter scenario or imposter syndrome, but going in and seeing a bunch of other people that are probably feeling the exact same thing as you, you know, to a certain degree, right?
some, yeah,
Yeah,
like
some.
some companies had 25 people in Sri Lanka, or they had like 15 people in Arizona. There's a bunch.
You're kind of going up all on your own,
Oh yeah,
right? So I get what you mean now when you say
we're
that.
out of the garage in Edmonton, and I just came from the infantry, and it turns out I realized that everybody has like a superpower, right? You can have a master's in dark matter theory, like my roommate, or you could be from the infantry. And it turns out through the program, it was 5 weeks long. There was two big moments. Like one was like a weekend hackathon, because it was 7 days a week there. Basically, if you have an idea, come up with it, and then you have to pitch it to the rest of the cohort of the other 80 people, and then they'll choose whether or not they want to work with you on the hackathon for the weekend. And we actually came second in that hackathon just because nobody actually believed that we got a meeting with NASA out of it. It's like a long story,
Super
but
cool.
That's the power of the Valley, I think, is, and why people have a hard time trying to replicate it anywhere else in the world, is that everybody down there understands that if it's not right for me, they're almost conditioned to not say no. And I think when you're not in that ecosystem, you go to a lot of different places, and they're rewarded for saying no because they don't see enough high quality startups or deal flow that comes through. So they say no, they're kind of conditioned to it, and they're rewarded for it because they don't see 10,000 companies a year. They see 500 or 1,000, and then at that point, it's really tough to try and break that mold. So it's nothing about the Valley's perfect for what you need. They have a huge access to this really deep pool, but if you don't need to be there, then you can't be there.
Right.
And I think that's kind of a trap some companies run into. Like they have all these really high quality people. If you're doing software as a service, that's where they all are. Yeah. And so that's where you need to go, is where your pool is, right?
Right.
But for us, it turns out Northern Alberta is the best place in the world for us.
Yeah. So bringing it back to Pegasus, back to Alberta here. So I mean, we kind of haven't really touched base, but I mean, you guys are essentially a drone company. You guys develop and utilize drones for a variety of services. Can you take us through some of the services that you do? And again, they're back here in Alberta. You were telling us some stuff off camera in regards to like imagery for pipeline and inspection and whatnot. Tell us a little bit about that.
So firstly, people kind of get it wrong.
Okay.
At the end of the day, all that matters is what we deliver to people. So we're actually a data as a service company.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And so what we looked at is we said drones have had basically a decade to underwhelm everybody. Manned aviation has continued to do what they do, and their margins are really small, so they charge a really high rate for what they're currently producing. Satellites don't have the ability yet to have true like engineering grade accuracy for the imagery that they're collecting. So they're very good at covering large areas, but the accuracy is kind of tough, and they're really expensive. We're bridging that gap because when we look at drones from our background, we think something flying over Iraq, not something from Best Buy, so to speak. So when we look at it as bridging that capability gap between defense and consumer, that's really where we see a sweet spot. So we carry a bunch of different types of sensors, and what it really comes down to is the same question we talk to everybody about right out of the gate, like, what is your request for effect? Like, what do you need? Like, what's your problem? And what does the actual solution you need look like? So if it's LiDAR, or if it's infrared mapping, or if it's just live video for situational awareness, whatever you need as a client to hit that right sweet spot, like you're 100% fit, that's what we go for. So we're sensor agnostic, but we can carry a bunch of different types.
Right.
The reason we're here in Northern Alberta as opposed to in California is really simple. The population density is very low, so there's not a whole lot of people potentially near where we're flying. The airspace is relatively quiet when you go north of Edmonton.
Gotcha.
And then we're also flying over top of the economic engine of a G7 country. So forestry, oil and gas, agriculture, mining, all of these different industries, they're all here. And unlike a lot of companies in California who have to go to Africa or South America to go and test their technology in less regulated airspaces, we're directly going into in the same area code to do our test, trial, commercialization. And this year, in 2020, we're launching a pilot project with some key stakeholders that have expressed very strong interest, or we've already worked with previously from last year. So the regulator, Transport Canada, is actually going to be joining us on this pilot project. And this will give us an opportunity to not only help our company advance, but do a better job of informing the regulator so that they can make really sound decisions, not entirely based on what we say, but helping them get that draft legislation in place based on some actually informed information.
Yeah, make sure we're not closing any doors and keeping that, the options open for what this could be and what the importance of it is.
Yeah, and the other side to it is two things really as a close. One, we talk about diversifying the economy here in Alberta. It's not a buzzword, it's like a mission imperative for the government, for all our communities here in Western Canada.
Yep.
You don't diversify an economy like out of oil and gas by picking something that's infinitely small and is like a secondary or tertiary market to help support industry. You choose something that's bigger. So how we look at it with this Aerospace Accelerator program is we want to bring aerospace to Alberta. We see it as it's a $10 trillion a year market, and we see commercial aviation having really set standards and really exceptional 99.99% safety records. We want to bring the same thing to remotely piloted systems, and we see this industry being 20 years from now equal to or probably even bigger because you can't use a 737 to collect information on a farmer's field.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's super cool. Again, in the diversification, I love that diversification of our economy. And we've talked about it, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, but making sure that we're looking at technology as a tool to advance industries, not as a replacement. It's just a tool to get us to the next level, more efficiency, be more effective. So. Yeah, right on.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. Like I said, we could talk all day.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks again for coming in and joining us. This was fantastic.
What that's called.